Hello everybody, it's Riffraff Hornhelm, and I'm back again with another presentation from the Dwarven Vault, and today we have a monster review. In our monster review, this is the first part of it, and this is going to cover some of the general background that applies to them all, but what we're going to talk about are dragons. Doesn't that just make you happy? I mean, it's right in the name of the game. And what we're going to do is talk about the dragons in the original Monster Manual as used with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in the very earliest days of the game. And really, it's highly appropriate. It's 50 years that this game has been out as a commercial item, and there's been 50 years of joy and fun involved with Dungeons & Dragons. And it's a game that has evolved over time. Now, I know that 5e is super popular, and there's loads and loads of people playing it out there, and bless you all. It's very good. Us dwarves love to see that happening. At the same time, there are some of us, me, that go way back to the earliest days of the game, and have some experiences to share, especially as we see a growth in interest in playing original versions of Dungeons & Dragons. And with dragons being an iconic part of the game, when you were an early player, you expected to run into a dragon sooner or later. You knew it would be badass and it might kick your ass, but you wanted to run into a dragon. And running into a dragon was loads of fun, especially early in D&D, because you really didn't know what to expect. So let's talk about dragons in general for a moment here. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, so in the Monster Manual version, there are 12 different dragons. Essentially 6 good ones and 6 evil ones. Only 12. I mean, what is there now? Like 400 or 500? More? I'm not sure. There could be more. But initially, there was only these 12. And the emphasis on dragons has morphed over time as well. There's a lot of characteristics that were part of the original Dungeons & Dragons versions of dragons that have either been lost over time or have changed considerably. The makeup of the dragon, its character and personality have changed. So what's different? Well, in the earliest days of Dungeons & Dragons, there was pretty much a equal split, shall we say, or fairly equal split, between whether or not you wanted to kill a dragon or whether you wanted to subdue a dragon. The idea being to capture it and being able to sell it elsewhere, make money off of it. It was another means of facilitating the acquisition of treasure for your party and for your characters. Not a bad idea. So, of course, subdual was a major feature that I don't see happening very often anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, in the earliest days of the game, you wanted to focus on younger dragons. They were easier to subdue. You weren't out there trying to subdue an ancient red dragon or anything like that. But at the same time, it was a more seen aspect of the game back in the early days. And dragons, of course, had some very specific behaviors, some of which have continued on to today, but many of which, like I said, have kind of been lost over time. Dragons, while smart, have a great deal of avarice. They really, really want treasure. And they're also narcissistic. You can flatter dragons, you can offer them money. This is in the early context of the game, and most dragons are susceptible to this to one degree or another. Now, intelligence varies between the dragons. Some have some fairly low intelligence, but the initial core of dragons were generally fairly smart because many of them have the ability to acquire spells over time, and also many of them are able to speak languages that the player characters would speak, say human or elvish or whatever, and in many cases could also change their appearance so that they appeared as a human. Dragons were interesting. Probably the closest model for the dragons that were in the original game was Smog. I think, at least. Kind of overconfident and arrogant and extremely tuned into his treasure and his surroundings. That's pretty typical for an ancient dragon. Really, the color has less to do with it than the age and the amount of accrued knowledge that they've been able to pick up during this entire time. So that makes it kind of interesting. Of course, being magical creatures themselves, they have a fair amount of abilities when it comes to defeating magic or not being affected by magic, which made it more challenging for a group of characters. I mean, even if you had the perfect spell, in many cases, because of its enhanced ability to make saves, it saved usually at a fairly good number, especially once it got up in age. And those, of course, were the bosses that you would run into, were dragons that were not necessarily ancient, but old enough to be very effective with their additional abilities. And of course, can we forget the breath weapon? I mean, really, who popularized the fireball? The fireball, that's just a spell. The dragon sitting there and spouting fire all over the damn place, that's what got this whole thing started. I'm pretty sure. But dragons, of course, love their horde. And a dragon horde becomes a instant dungeon adventure. And from the number of these that I both played in and created back in the day, this was a very popular adventure scenario. You would go and look for a dragon, or a dragon would be prevalent in the place that you were going to. You may not be looking for them, but you don't want them looking for you, if you catch my drift. So you had to be careful out there when you were dealing with dragons, because even a weak dragon is pretty potent. I think the lowest of any of the 12 dragons, I think, is about 6 hit dice. And I'm talking for an adult. Many of the adults are considerably more than that. And of course, some of the most famous dragons, which are, frankly, the ones that you would run into the least, but are, of course, the ones that are most popular, Tiamat and Bahamut. They're wonderful creatures to throw into a game, but do be careful about them. They are extremely rare. They're one-offs. There's only one of each. So if they show up a little bit too often, that seems a bit off. So just be careful with that. But overall, dragons have so many different abilities. And of course, if you subdue them, then it's a constant battle to keep them subdued. That battle varies depending on whether or not your alignment and the dragon's alignment is similar, what your intelligence and strength and so forth is of you and your party versus what the dragon's capable of doing. So let's say you were lucky enough to subdue a ancient red dragon. Doesn't even have to be a fat one. Well, if you did that, you'd probably be fighting that dragon every step of the way. It would be trying to escape from the control that you're exerting over it, and it has a pretty good chance of doing so. Now, if you picked up a young red dragon, that would be a lot easier to deal with. And in the early days, as I said, part of the reason you did this was that you could go sell them. You got some pretty good whacks of money for bringing in a dragon, so if you found a dragon brood and were able to bring in, say, 2 or 3 young green dragons or whatever it may have been, you got some good, serious cash out of it. Made it worthwhile. Of course, worthwhile is a relative term, if you found a young dragon and it was in its lair, it would have some cashola. Let's face it, they'd have some kind of treasure there, and that would make you happy, but there wouldn't be very much. The size of the hoard goes with the abilities and age of the dragon. So it's not until you get to a big ancient old dragon that you start running into the kind of stuff that you see in the movies. Well, I guess it does depend on your DM, but you wouldn't get it from me. So you would need to find specific circumstances that had a big enough hoard to attract your attention. But at the same time, that also means that your opponent is of a much higher caliber. Could be worse. But treasure is one of the main reasons you want to go after the dragon. In an ideal world, you subdue a dragon, you get its treasure, and you sell it. Now, that was a good basis for more than one adventure that I recall back in the day. And everybody was pretty happy playing those kind of adventures. No two ways about it. So going forward, we're going to spend time on the individual dragons, and we're going to review and rank those as we go through. The only comment I would have about dragons to start with the original game, is that they didn't have enough of them. There should have been more. A dozen wasn't enough. But a dozen is what we've got, and that's what we'll review. Those will be individual reviews. This is more looking at the overall dragon. And really, if you look in the original monster manual, there's a couple pages detailing a lot of scenarios, the specifics involved with a sleeping dragon and how you awake it, and whether or not you get pluses. And by the way, you do while it's still sleeping. Of course, they go away when it wakes up. But it covers the rest of the details if you wanted to plan a very specific dragon encounter. This is material you should read. It's not just the entry for the specific dragon, it's the general information so that you better understand how dragons operate if you're going to use one as a DM. Now, from a player standpoint, if you want to kill dragons, you need to read this stuff. It's important. It will help you to better understand what the limits of the creature are. And of course, that varies from dragon to dragon. But still, the overall information, so you know how to behave around a sleeping dragon, what you may have to do if you had to subdue it, whether or not you can trust a dragon, and the answer is pretty much no, at least if they're evil. And really a good mix of materials that you're going to need to understand to one degree or another if you want to be the lead or the main success when it comes to dealing with a dragon. Let your player character take the way, but they can do it only through knowledge. Well, and a very sharp sword, and maybe some really good spells, and a machine gun. Oh, wait, you can't have that. So that's the general on the dragon going forward. We're going to rank each of the individual dragons, and we're going to go through them in some detail so that you as a player or as a DM have a better understanding of dragons. And it's entirely appropriate this year, it being the 50th year for a game called Dungeons & Dragons, that we spend some time talking about Dungeons & Dragons. Well, this is the dragon part. There'll be some future stuff on dungeons. But right now I'm going to go through our dozen different dragons and see how it goes. Hope you liked this. If you did, give us a like. Consider subscribing. Share with your friends. Don't ever be afraid to leave me comments if there's something specific that you would like me to take a look at, especially here in this grand 50th year, going back to the early Dungeons & Dragons stuff. I'd love to hear from you. Just let me know in the comments, drop me a direct message. The contact details are in the description. And in the meantime, take care, everyone, and remember, dwarves rock!